Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so wicked happy that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Jessica Vitalis. She is here to celebrate the Rabbit's Gift. Before we invite Jessica into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Antidote's Pollution Solution, a fantastic middle grade novel written by public health specialist Dr. Patty Michelle. Just when a group of fifth grade friends is returning to normal life and to school after a global pandemic, the waters of the Chesapeake Bay have become polluted by a plastic-eating bacteria experiment gone wrong, and both fish and kids are getting sick. Izzy, Gare, and their friends go to Science Club and discover a fishy cover-up. The school has to close down again. These climate warriors, who call themselves the Antidotes, join forces with public health activists to find clean water solutions. The Antidotes race against the clock to get the word out to kids around the world about how to stay safe. But will the Antidotes be able to get enough kids to achieve zero plastic use before it makes any more fish or children sick? Join the Antidotes in their first science adventure and stay tuned for more stories to come. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by Alicia Connected, the award-winning middle grade novel by Derek Fisher. Alicia has finally entered a new world of technology when her parents give her a tablet for her birthday. She has watched and listened to her friends who have already been enjoying the games and apps in a connected world that Alicia has yet to experience until now. But using technology can bring a set of challenges that are new to both Alicia and her parents. Understanding the different apps and games and how to use them properly can be tricky. Will Alicia know how to use it in a way that is fun and allows her to connect with her friends while being safe and secure? Both her and her parents will face the excitement and the challenges together as she jumps headfirst into using her new tablet. This is a really wonderful book that can help you help your kids stay safe online. It can help you stay safe online, too. It's Alicia Connected, the award-winning middle grade novel by Derek Fisher. Join us right now from the beautiful province of Ontario and the lovely nation of Canada. Our guest today is here to celebrate her middle grade fantasy. It's called The Rabbit's Gift. Please welcome to the show, Jessica Vitalis. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
I am excellent and so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to you telling us all about The Rabbit's Gift. I'm imagining it's not like the gift the rabbits here in our backyard give my wife, which is to eat all of her plants. We're not talking about that.
That would not be a gift, no.
So tell us about the story, please.
Sure, I'd be glad to. The Rabbit's Gift is actually a twist on French mythology, and it is set in a country where human babies are grown in cabbage-like plants, and they are delivered by rabbits. The story is told in dual points of view. So on one hand, we have a very sweet, scrawny rabbit by the name of Quincy, who is longing to prove himself to his starving Warren. And on the other side, we have a human by the name of Florine. And Florine longs to study botany, but is expected to follow in her maman's political footsteps. And when Florine discovers Quincy stealing her precious purple carrot seeds, she follows him back to the top secret warren. And that sets off a string of events that could very well be catastrophic for the humans and for the rabbits.
Wow. Wow, you had me with babies are grown in cabbage. That was both. That idea is both fascinating and terrifying for some reason. When you talked about, I'm like, wow, ooh, wow. Where did so that this is you're saying that this is based on French mythology. So that wasn't an idea that kind of sprung up in your head one night.
No, actually, it started with the publication of my first book, which is called The Wolf's Curse. And that story is a twist on Grim Reaper mythology. And it's narrated by an invisible great white wolf. And so I always wanted to do a companion novel to that. That was the exact opposite. But doing something with birth didn't feel right for the middle grade market. So I just assumed that would never happen. And I was complaining about that on the phone to one of my critique partners one day. And she said, well, what about La Fille à Choux, which is a French silent film from 1896 that was made by the first female French filmmaker, and her name is Alice Guy Blanchet. And I went and I looked this up on YouTube, and it's just a 1-minute black and white film based on French mythology. And the filmmaker had dressed up in a fairy, and she had these large fake cabbage, and she was plucking real babies and sometimes dolls out of them, and then just sort of unceremoniously dumping them on the ground. And it was, as you said, a little bit creepy, really, really funny. And I was just absolutely captivated. And I knew right away that I had found my birth mythology that would be appropriate for the middle grade market. And so I was off and running.
I don't know what that says about our educational system and our publication system that we can't talk about what really happens with birth, but we can talk about babies growing up in cabbages.
There's probably a long conversation that could be had there, right?
I'm always fascinated with authors who create these fantastical worlds. And I'm most interested in how you kind of keep the laws of physics in your universe straight as you're creating the story.
That's a wonderful question. For me, it always really just grows out of the premise itself. So I start out knowing that I'm writing historical fantasy, which means that the book is sort of rooted in the real world, but I give myself plenty of room to grow out the mythology and the traditions based on what the story needs. So in this case, I was starting with the premise that human babies were going to be grown in these cabbage-like plants, and then the rabbits were going to deliver them. But of course, I had to know, for example, how would the rabbits know when and where to deliver these babies? Well, there had to be some type of, I want not a spiritual power, but a greater power that I thought rabbits have these big ears and they're known for listening. And so I invented the great maman in the moon. And so she can see when humans have put out these purple carrots in the little planters in front of their home. So that signals that they want a baby. And then the rabbits with their big ears can hear the great maman in the moon whispering and telling them that they need to deliver babies to these houses. So for me, the mythology very much grows out of the needs of the book.
Okay, yeah, that's so do you ever find yourself so do you set up this world completely in your mind when you sit down to put fingers to keyboards or pen to paper, or do things kind of when you hit something and go, oh, I need a solution for this, and then kind of add it as needed, as the need appears?
It's very much the latter for me. So when I sit down to write a book, I usually know who my main character is, and I know what they want and what they need, and going after what they want or what they need drives the plot in the story. And then I just build out the mythology around what arises from their adventures.
Oh, that's fascinating. So tell us about our main character. Tell us a little bit more about her.
Sure. Well, there are the two main characters. You have Quincy Rabbit, and Quincy is, of course, a rabbit. So he is growing up in this warren, and particularly in a burrow where there are lots and lots and lots of siblings. And he has an older brother in particular who is one of the delivery rabbits. And delivery is the most sought after job in the warren because you get to leave the warren and you get to see the human world. But to be a delivery rabbit, you have to be quite large because you have to be able to tuck these the cabbage-like plants that I've developed that carry the babies into your pouch. And Quincy is really, really, really smart, but he's also really scrawny. So he cannot be a delivery rabbit. And that really breaks his heart and sort of is what sets him up to decide that he has to do something to help his Warren to prove himself. And then on the other side, we have this human character, Florine, and she is an only child, and her mother is the most powerful leader in the country, and science is actually forbidden in this country. And not only that, but Florine is expected to follow in her mother's political footsteps, which is something that she very much does not want to do. And as an only child, she thinks that if only she had a sibling, maybe somebody to help shoulder some of this burden that her mother is constantly putting on her to be this perfect political daughter, her life would be ever so much better. So it's really the family dynamics for each character that drives this story.
That dynamic that you spoke about, being expected to follow in your parents' footsteps, I think that's something that a lot of kids can relate to, and whether they're feeling pressure, that's real pressure coming from their parents or the people around them, or if it's pressure that they're kind of putting on themselves, like, oh, my mom is this and my dad is this, and well, I really should kind of go in that direction. I think that's a struggle that a lot of kids can relate to.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And it's not only the expectations that our parents put on us, but also if you happen to grow up in a very large family, it's how you fit into the family and your birth order and how you see your siblings and how they see you. And all of these things shape us in such fascinating ways. And so I really wanted to explore that in this story.
Yeah. And Quincy, too, I imagine, too, there's a lot of kids out there, especially in those middle grade ages, that they're not happy with their body. There's so much stuff there they would love to be able to do, but I really can't be a linebacker because I only weigh 85 pounds, and they're all 200. So I think that this is a story that's very relatable to a lot of kids on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, I really hope that you're right. And that's what I was trying to do with the dual characters, is not just write one character, but maybe if there's something you don't quite relate to Florine about, I'm suspecting there's probably something with Quincy that you're going to love, or vice versa.
Yeah. Were these characters inspired by anybody in particular, or any moment in your life in particular?
Not really. They mostly just came out of my struggle to find the right companion novel for The Wolf's Curse, because that story was narrated again by an omniscient narrator. So I thought initially that I had to have an omniscient narrator for The Rabbit's Gift. But every time I sat down to write this story with this rabbit who sort of knew everything, it just ended up sounding like the wolf all over again. And so I was doing some free writing, and that's when Quincy's voice came to me. And Quincy was this scrawny little runt who was very obsessed with the idea of heroes and villains and wanting to be a hero and viewing the humans as villains. But I couldn't quite wrap my head around how to drive the whole story from his point of view. So then I started to just think about what would be a great contrast. Well, a great contrast would be a human girl, and what would she want? And I thought it would be fun to do something just completely different. So she lives this very privileged life as an only child, which is so different from Quincy. So it was this idea of really wanting to look at all the different contrasts that I could find in the story.
Interesting. I love this. I think this could be a great conversation for kids who aspire to write to listen to. So as you're thinking about these two contrasting characters and living in these two different worlds, do you actually sit down and make a list as you prepare to write?
No, my preparation is pretty minimal, but I will say that I had been writing for 13 years before I got my first book deal and had written 7 full novels. So the preparation that I had done was just lots and lots and lots of practice writing, and also reading a lot of craft books so that I understand how stories fit together in my head, so that as I write, I kind of know what needs to come next and I know how to flesh out characters. if you are not somebody who's done a lot of studying, then I think it probably would be helpful to do some pre-writing and to know some things about your characters. As I said before, knowing what your character wants is really, really important because that drives the action in the story. And then there's usually something that they need that's different that they don't know that they need. And that's the thing at the end of the story that they're going to embrace. And that's what's going to make the reader feel so happy and so satisfied at the end.
I love that idea, sitting down as we're preparing to write and thinking about what a character needs, but first what the character wants, and then what ultimately the character needs. I think that could be a good discussion for a parent and a kid to have about the kid. Just to sit down and think, hey, what is it that you want out of life? Okay, let's talk about that. And so if you want to get that, what do you need?
I love that approach. You're absolutely right, because so often what we think is going to make us happy isn't actually what makes us happy, right? I have this conversation all the time with my author friends because we're all just convinced that the next book deal will make us happy or that winning the next award will make us happy. And at the end of the day, it's really about the process. And there's so many different things that go into making you happy that just achieving a goal isn't enough because you always move the goalposts, right? There's always the next thing then that you want to strive for. So yeah, those are really important conversations to have.
Yeah. And having it within the context of reading a book like The Rabbit's Gift together with your tween is a much more effective way than sitting down and having that talk. All right, let's talk about what you want and what do you need to do to get that? It's just so much, it's so much more relaxed, because when you're talking about a story, especially with tweens who are not comfortable with themselves and, I don't want to say the wrong thing in front of my parents, and just like, hey, we're talking about Quincy, we're talking about Florine, we're not talking about you, but maybe we're going to talk about you. Let's go in and it's a really effective way, but it's a really sneaky way of having that conversation with your kids without your kids knowing that you're having that conversation.
It is, but it's also so true, right? As a parent, I know that the best conversations with my kids usually happen when we're not sitting down to have that talk. They usually happen when we're in the car and we don't have to make direct eye contact, or we start out talking about something different. And as you well know, books are a wonderful way to do that. And I would even take it a step further and say that fantasy books in particular are a wonderful way to do that, because not only are you moving into a fictional world, but you're moving into a fantastical world that's so far removed that I think it really breaks down a lot of those barriers that kids feel in terms of, are we really going to talk about this? Well, it's fantasy. It's okay to talk about this. And it really opens a door in a way that might not otherwise open.
Yeah. You mentioned something, and I always was fascinated. I remember when my kids were in middle school and I would hear their friends' parents would always complain, I got to drive the kids. I got to drive the kids. I would love to drive the kids because it was like unlocking this box of conversation. Conversation seemed, when we turned down the radio and just talked, it seemed so much better. And I think maybe one of the keys to that is that we weren't directly looking at each other. There wasn't that intense eye contact. I'm looking out and I'm paying attention to the road, and my daughter or my son might be looking out or looking at a book or cleaning their shoes, but it was just so much more relaxed. And forget about their friends in the back of the car. Man, I learned so much just being quiet in that driver's seat. They would forget that I was there.
Absolutely. You just become completely invisible and you learn way more than you would otherwise. So yeah. I too always volunteer to drive because I just love hearing those interactions. And of course, as a writer, it helps me too, because I can file little things away about how tweens and teens are talking and interacting. But yeah, I love those conversations that just come up spontaneously. And another good trick is just to leave an audiobook on in your car so that you can have this little snippets of story playing, and then, you can shut it off and come back to it later. And that gives you something to talk about around the dinner table. And, other times it's just another way to connect about something both of you are into and enjoying.
Yeah. we're living in, I remember going, I do these, I was telling Jessica before, I just finished a epic cross-continent drive. And it was really wonderful because all my audiobooks were stored on this little rectangular thing here. And it was wonderful. It wasn't like in the old days where I had to, turn the cassette tape upside down and around, and there were 6 tapes to tell us. Stephen King story would be like a library of cassette tapes to listen to the whole story. And sometimes you wouldn't put the right one in. It's so much easier now.
It really is. And for me, it really makes driving enjoyable. My oldest, who's now in university, and I just drove from Ontario down to Salt Lake City. And we spent most of the time listening to audiobooks. And again, it was such a wonderful way to connect, that we could have that shared experience together and something to talk about. And we could turn it off and turn it on. And as you said, it's all at the tip of your fingers. And if you're not enjoying one, you can just move on to the next.
Yeah, yeah. And talk about drives. One of the things my daughter and I, when she was a teenager, would choose to come out on tour with me. And she would hop in the van, and we would be on the road for 3 weeks at a time. And it was just so wonderful. We would have conversations. We would listen to audiobooks. We would listen to music. And then sometimes we would just go for a couple of hours without saying anything to each other and be completely comfortable with that.
Yeah, there's a real magic in that too, right?
Yeah, yeah. And if anybody's out there, if you had my epic cross-continent journey was my first time driving through Utah, and wow, I felt like I was driving on the moon.
It certainly is a different landscape, yes.
Yeah, it was amazing. It really was. And I imagine you saw a different route coming down from Ontario to Salt Lake City, but we both live in 2 really majestic, amazing countries, and they're so big, and there's so many people in both of our countries, but there's also so much empty space.
That is certainly true. And there is no way that you can miss that as you're driving toward Utah, right? Driving down through Wyoming. And yeah, we were both stunned by just the vast. I mean, I had grown up living parts of my life in Wyoming, so I was familiar with that, but you just forget how big the countries can be.
Yeah. I remember we're on the way across to Los Angeles. I went through Texas and New Mexico, and there were exits, and there was an exit, and there would be a sign, no services. And it's like, of course there's no services. I can look in all 4 directions like for 100 miles, and there's nothing. And I don't know what that road is going to, that there's an exit for, but it ain't leading to anything I can see.
That is so true. I had the exact same experience, which is not always convenient when you need food or gas.
Oh, yes. This is true. This is true. Do you ever get, when you're in a place like that, a foreign place, being in those environments, does that ever spark something that ends up in one of your stories?
In this case, it was particularly timely because my next book is actually set in Wyoming, which, as I mentioned, I had grown up, I wouldn't say grown up there, but I had lived there at a few different times as a child. And so it had been decades since I had been back. So just going back to drive through it and get a feel for, as you said, the vast space and all of the different landscape was really helpful for me to sort of fine tune and polish my book. But most of my story ideas are from a setting perspective grown out of some place that I have been. So the Wolf's Curse and the Rabbit's Gift are a merging of when I was younger. I was an exchange student in a tiny little fishing village on the northern coast of Germany. And I always wanted to write a story set in a fishing village, but I had also just got back from France and I was just completely obsessed with all things French. So I decided to pluck out my tiny little fishing village and move it to France. And so that's what drives the French inspiration and the French feel in those 2 novels.
Wow. I think we have to ask you back to have a conversation about travels and just traveling and the benefits of that. But until then, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about The Rabbit's Gift and also find out more about you.
Fantastic. They can find me online at jessicavitalis.com. They can also find me on Twitter at Jessica Vitalis or on Instagram at Jessica the Author. And both of my books are available everywhere that books are sold.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Rabbit's Gift, a great middle grade fantasy by our guest, Jessica Vitalis. Hey, Jessica, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Monica Berg. She's here to celebrate the gift of being different. It's a wonderful book to help us change the way we view learning challenges and learning differences. You don't want to miss it. It's really important. Monica Berg, the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a fantastic children's book, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how you can be a guest here on the podcast, to find out how you can submit your book to our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read panel, and find out how you can advertise your book through the Reading with Your Kids podcast, celebrating your book on our podcast, to our social media following, and on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. Imagine your book art and a message about your book on digital pedestrian billboards right outside of Fenway Park here in Boston, and Atlanta, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Albany, New York, Toledo, Ohio, Hermiston, Oregon. Learn all about that and more at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Jessica Vitalis. Please be sure to check out The Rabbit's Gift. I also want to thank our sponsors, Derek Fisher, author of the award-winning middle grade novel, Alicia Connected, and also Dr. Patty Michelle. Be sure to check out The Antidotes Pollution Solution. I want to thank my team, Rory Grady, Fatima Khan, Mirabella Q, Jordan Saley. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.